Queen Camilla walked the line with a smile. The inspection was meant to be routine. Then, one royal guard stepped forward. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a sealed DNA report. The words he read weren't long, but in less than 47 seconds the courtyard was silent, and the Queen herself could only whisper one word, please. So what exactly did that evidence reveal? Before we answer, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will change how you see the British royal family forever. Horse Guards Parade, London. The kind of morning that photographers dream of. Pale blue sky above, banners fluttering in a crisp breeze. The sound of hooves on cobblestones echoing across the wide parade ground. Rows of grenadier guards stood in scarlet and black, rifles gleaming in the sun, their tall bearskins forming a wall of ceremonial authority. Behind them, tourists pressed against the rope lines, cameras raised, hushed in reverence for the precision unfolding before them. The occasion was a formal inspection, Queen Camilla herself stepping out from the royal carriage, flanked by senior aides, security and journalists. Her heels clicked across the stone as she walked slowly past the first line of guards, her head tilting with the practiced nod of approval, the faintest smile arranged for the lenses trained upon her. She had done this countless times, and it was meant to be effortless. A symbol of continuity, of tradition carried forward without disturbance. Among the soldiers stood Lance Sergeant Rowan Blake, late 30s, a man the regiment knew but did not often speak of. Decorated in Afghanistan years before, he had since become one of those figures who melted into the background. He was remembered not for words, but for silence. Stillness was his defining trait, while others shifted or blinked under the long hours of guard duty. Blake seemed almost immovable, as if stone had carved itself into the form of a man. Officers appreciated it. The rank and file sometimes whispered about it. He did not seek attention. He did not break discipline, not once. But what they didn't know about the man beneath the bearskin was that Blake had served a different kind of duty 23 years earlier. In 1999, as a young guardsman, he'd been quietly assigned to Princess Diana's covert protection detail during her final months. Not the obvious security you'd see in photographs, but the kind that stayed in shadows, watching for threats that might come from unexpected directions. He'd been there the night she'd returned from that last trip to Paris, had seen the fear in her eyes that the newspapers never reported, had heard her quiet conversation with her private secretary about people who smile while they plan your disappearance. Diana had pulled him aside that night, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rowan," she'd said, using his first name despite protocol, "I need you to understand something. If anything happens to me, if there's an accident or I suddenly decide to retreat from public life, remember that I never wanted to disappear. Remember that some people get what they want by making their competition vanish." He'd tried to reassure her, told her she was being paranoid, but Diana had just shaken her head, her hands trembling as she spoke. "I've spent years learning to trust my instincts about people who threaten you while smiling. And tonight, looking into certain eyes, I know someone has been planning conversations like this for months." She'd gripped his arm then, her fingernails digging in through his uniform sleeve. "Promise me something. If they succeed in silencing me, don't let them rewrite who I was. Don't let them turn me into a footnote in someone else's fairy tale." Blake had promised. A promise he'd kept locked away for 23 years, watching as Diana's memory was slowly sanitized, her inconvenient truths buried beneath official narratives and charitable platitudes. But today, something stirred beneath that stillness. Inside his tunic, hidden from view, was not just one envelope, but a sealed leather portfolio. Its edges were worn from years of being carried across postings, guarded as closely as any rifle. He had been entrusted with it in Diana's final weeks, though no one in his regiment knew. No one except him and the woman who had pressed it into his hands with shaking fingers, with the words, "When they try to deny it all, when they rewrite history to suit themselves, you'll know what to do." The inspection line drew closer. Camilla advanced, speaking quietly with a general at her side, pointing occasionally to medals on the men's chests. She carried herself with the assurance of a queen who believed the setting was hers, the soldiers hers, the silence hers to command. The clicking of cameras followed her, a metronome of ceremony. Then she reached Rowan Blake. For a heartbeat, her practiced royal stride faltered. Not obviously, she was too experienced for that. But there was a pause, a fractional hesitation as her eyes met his. Something flickered behind her composed expression. Not just recognition, but the kind of fear that comes from seeing a ghost you'd hoped was permanently buried. She remembered him. Of course she did. The quiet guardsman who'd been shadow to Diana during those final, dangerous months. The one who'd witnessed conversations that were never supposed to happen. Who'd stood outside doors during meetings that existed in no official record. Blake had been there the night Camilla had made her unscheduled visit to Kensington Palace. Arriving without escort or announcement to deliver an ultimatum that was never supposed to be remembered. He'd heard enough through the study door to understand what was being negotiated and what was being threatened. Now, 23 years later, he stood before her in full ceremonial dress, carrying secrets that could unravel everything she'd built since that night. Camilla's throat felt suddenly dry. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly around her clutch bag as memories flooded back. Diana's tears after that final confrontation. The princess's desperate calls to friends about feeling trapped. The way she'd started looking over her shoulder everywhere she went. Protocol demanded he remain motionless, rifle at his side, eyes fixed forward, lips sealed. And for a long moment, he seemed to do just that, until he didn't. In a movement so slight, it was almost imperceptible, Blake shifted. One boot scraped against the cobblestone, stepping forward by the breadth of a single pace. The sound was enough to ripple down the line. Tourists gasped. Officers snapped their heads toward him, brows furrowed. The general at Camilla's side barked, "Hold your line, Sergeant!" But Blake did not retreat. His chin lifted, his gaze steady. The rifles of those beside him trembled, as if the breach in silence itself carried shockwaves. And then, for the first time in years, Rowan Blake spoke. His voice was not loud, but in that setting, against the hush of hundreds, it carried like a bell. "Your Majesty," he said evenly, "you know this isn't the whole truth." The words sliced the ceremony apart. The band faltered mid-note. Cameras swung sharply toward him. Tourists froze, hands half raised, their photographs forgotten. Officers stared in disbelief, as if they'd just witnessed a soldier sprout wings. Camilla stopped dead in her tracks. Her practiced smile held for half a second too long, then faltered, only slightly, but enough for those closest to see. She blinked once, twice, her lips parting as though the air had thickened around her. The general beside her moved to step between them, but she lifted a gloved hand, not in command, but in hesitation. Rowan Blake's expression never shifted. He looked neither rebellious nor afraid, only certain. And in his certainty, the centuries-old silence of the guard cracked like glass. The silence on Horse Guards Parade hung heavier than the clouds that drifted across the August sky. Tourists, who only moments before had been clicking cameras and whispering about the Queen's outfit, were frozen. The sharp bark of the adjutant's command had not broken the spell. Neither had the shuffle of officers rushing closer, or the glare from Captain Morton as he hissed, "Stand down, Sergeant Blake, you're out of line!" But Rowan Blake did not move back. His eyes remained level, his voice steady. The words he had spoken, "Your Majesty, you know this isn't the whole truth," still echoed like a drumbeat through the courtyard. Camilla, her hands clasped neatly in front of her cream dress coat, allowed only the faintest flicker of surprise to crease her face. Years of public life had trained her for intrusions, hecklers, stares, but this was different. This was one of her guards, her own wall of silence, breaking itself from within. She tilted her head slightly, as if his words were a misunderstanding. "Sergeant," she said, her voice light, carrying just enough for the nearest microphones to catch. "I expect discipline, not riddles." Blake's hand moved. Not a sudden gesture, but deliberate, controlled, as though choreographed into the ceremony itself. From beneath the edge of his scarlet tunic, he drew out a folded envelope, its flap sealed with a red wax stamp that caught the sunlight like blood. The gasp that rose from the watching tourists was sharp, collective. Cameras zoomed, journalists pressed forward. The officers froze between instinct and hesitation. Protocol did not account for this. Blake held the envelope at chest height, arms straight, a sentinel presenting arms. His voice carried across the cobblestones. "This was placed in my keeping over 20 years ago. I was told to deliver it only if silence became denial. Inside is a record of blood." The phrase alone sent a ripple through the crowd. Blood, spoken in the hushed air of Horse Guards parade, beneath the Union Jack, with the Queen Consort in front of him. Behind the rope barriers, a veteran with a regimental tie straightened. He knew Blake's service record, knew the man didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. A BBC correspondent frantically typed into his phone, already drafting alerts that would go out to newsrooms worldwide. In the VIP section, a senior MP leaned forward, understanding that whatever was about to unfold would require parliamentary questions within hours. Camilla's smile faltered, thin as porcelain about to crack. "That will do, Sergeant," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Hand it over immediately." He did not move. Instead, with the calm of a man obeying a higher order than his captain's bark, he broke the seal. The snap of wax echoed unnaturally loud. He unfolded the letter carefully, as if aware every movement was being watched by hundreds of eyes and dozens of cameras. The paper trembled faintly in his gloved hand, but his voice did not. Dated the 12th of May, 1999. Conducted at a private facility in Surrey. Confirmation of maternal DNA linkage. Positive. He paused, letting the words settle. Subject, male infant, approximately 6 weeks old. Reference sample, hair follicle, provided by source identified as primary female. For a moment, it meant nothing to those listening, just sterile language, the sort that fills official forms. But within seconds, the implication landed. Murmurs began. A woman in the tourist line clapped her hand over her mouth. A journalist hissed something into his phone. The BBC correspondent was already calling his editor. "We need to go live, now. Something's happening with the Queen Consort, and it's massive." Near the diplomatic section, the French ambassador whispered urgently to his aide, "Get the car ready. If this is what I think it is, Paris will want immediate briefing." Camilla's chin lifted a fraction higher, but her skin had lost its colour. Her fingers tightened around the clutch bag at her side. "Enough!" Captain Morton snapped, stepping forward. He reached for the letter, his gloved hand darting out like a striking snake. Blake did not flinch. He did not pull away, nor did he resist. He simply held the letter steady, unmoved, his gaze fixed not on Morton, but on the Queen herself. The effect was startling. The officer looked like a boy grasping at something immovable. The crowd knew instinctively where the weight of authority lay, and it was not with the captain. Camilla's eyes swept across the faces staring at her, the tourists who had come for photographs, the journalists scenting blood, the guards who stood frozen in formation, all of them waiting for her reply. She inhaled slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was meant to cut, but it trembled at the edges. "You presume much, Sergeant, to brandish unverified paper before the world. Do you think yourself judge, jury, and historian?" The tone was sharper than her words, but the cracks were showing. It was not the defiance of a monarch, it was the defensiveness of a woman cornered. Blake lowered the paper, folded it once more, and slid it back into the envelope with surgical precision. He did not raise his voice. He did not even look at the officers flanking him. "I am none of those, ma'am. I am a soldier sworn to truth, and I carry only what was entrusted." The weight of his calmness seemed heavier than shouting would have been. A nervous cough came from the journalist's pen. Somewhere in the back, a tourist whispered, "Is this real?" Camilla's mask faltered entirely for a heartbeat. Her lips moved, shaping words not meant for public ears. Not here, not like this. But the microphones nearby picked up enough. Her authority, usually absolute in such ceremonies, felt suddenly like it was balancing on the edge of a blade. And Blake? He stood tall, still as stone, scarlet coat, blazing against the muted grey of the London sky, a man with no need for anger. His very restraint gave the scene its tension. In that silence, it became clear. This was no heckler, no baseless intrusion. This was a leak, measured, deliberate, and unflinching. The air over Horse Guards parade felt charged, like the moments before a storm when the sky holds its breath. The paper had been seen, the words spoken, but everyone in the courtyard sensed there was more. One slip of parchment wasn't enough to bring the Queen Consort's composure to the edge. Something else was coming. Sergeant Rowan Blake adjusted his footing with the precision of drill, boots scraping lightly on the cobblestones. The sound was small, but in the amplified silence, it echoed like a gunshot. He lifted his chin, eyes fixed on Camilla, not in defiance, but with the flat steadiness of a man with nothing left to lose. "Ma'am," he said, his tone as formal as the morning's orders, "you would ask me for verification. You will have it." From within the inner fold of his tunic, beneath the regiment's brass buttons, he drew out a second object, a photograph, its corners bent, its gloss faded by time. Gasps rippled outward as he held it between his gloved fingers, not toward the Queen, not toward the captain, but outward. So the lenses of the cameras caught it. The long lenses zoomed, shutters clicked in frantic succession. The picture showed a hospital cot, sterile white sheets cradling an infant with eyes wide open. The kind of photograph that felt mundane to a family album, but devastating on a parade ground. And near the infant's wrist, visible even in the grainy capture, a bracelet tag, stamped with letters, a name that matched no official royal birth records from that year. Rowan's voice cut through the rustling crowd. "Facility code, date of birth, matching the record from Surrey, 1999. Note the timestamp, 3 hours after delivery." The words were plain, but paired with the photo, they gained teeth. In the crowd, a royal correspondent who'd covered Diana's death was frantically cross-referencing dates on his phone. His face went white as the math became clear. The child in the photograph would have been born exactly when Camilla was supposed to be on holiday in Scotland, according to official palace records. "Jesus Christ," he whispered to his cameraman. "We're watching the biggest royal scandal since the abdication." Camilla's fingers twitched against her clutch bag. She did not step forward, did not snatch at the photo. She knew the cameras were hungry for movement, but the colour in her cheeks drained further, her composure tightening into something brittle. Captain Morton spat. "This is beyond insubordination. This is treason." His boots clattered as he advanced, but an older colonel, standing to one side, lifted a hand to stop him. His face was unreadable, eyes narrowed, calculating. He had seen enough scandals unravel careers to know when force only fed flames. Blake lowered the photo, slipped it back into its sleeve with the same neat control as before, but he wasn't finished. From the same pocket, he drew out a small pendant on a chain, silver dulled by years, but unmistakable in its design. A crest embossed with a lion and crown, worn smooth at the edges. But there was something else, an inscription on the back, barely visible but clearly engraved. "This was delivered alongside the record," Blake announced, his tone still eerily level. "Said to be proof of belonging, passed from mother to child. Inscription reads, 'For my son, born of love not duty.'" He let the chain swing lightly in his hand, the pendant catching the light. The cameras drank it in, zooming so close that viewers at home could see the delicate script etched into the silver. The inscription hit like a physical blow. In the VIP section, several dignitaries exchanged glances that spoke volumes. "Born of love not duty," words that directly contradicted every official narrative about Camilla's relationship with the royal family during the late 1990s. Camilla's breath caught audibly, a sharp inhale, quick and shallow, the kind of sound no microphone should have been able to pick up, but in the electric stillness, it carried. The murmur among the crowd built into a low, rising tide. Words like cover-up, bloodlines and scandal hissed through the air. A journalist's voice cracked as he shouted, "Is this about legitimacy, Your Majesty?" The question sliced through the scene like a blade. Even the guards on either side of Blake, men trained to remain statues, shifted fractionally. Camilla's eyes locked on the pendant. For a flicker of a second, her mask fell completely, her lips tightened, her jaw clenched, and the truth showed not in words, but in the involuntary language of the body. She raised her chin again, forcing steel into her tone. "Sergeant Blake, you are finished. Whatever relics you claim to hold, whatever scraps of paper you've been misled by, they are not truth, and I command you, hand them over now." The order cracked like a whip, but it did not land. Blake stood unmoved, the pendant still visible. He answered quietly, "Truth isn't always what is said, ma'am. Sometimes it's what you cannot deny." The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. And the audience, hundreds of tourists, journalists and dignitaries, felt the weight of it. The colonel who had halted Morton spoke finally, his voice low but firm. "Captain, stand your ground. Let this play its course." His eyes lingered on the Queen, not the sergeant. Camilla's composure faltered a second time. For a heartbeat, her eyes closed, as if the weight of decades threatened to pull her under. She reopened them, but the sheen of command had dulled. Around her, aides and officers shifted uneasily. The tourists craned necks, smartphones lifted. The whole scene had shifted from pageantry to reckoning. Rowan Blake slipped the pendant back into its pouch, folded his hands neatly once more against the front of his tunic, and returned to stillness. But the damage was done. The truth had not been shouted, not paraded. It had been layered out like stone slabs, one upon the other. Record, photo, pendant. Each one undeniable, each one tightening the noose around silence. Camilla's lips parted, as if to form a rebuttal, but no words came. Not because she lacked them, but because she knew anything she said now would be devoured, dissected and displayed. The world was already drawing its own conclusions. And for the first time in decades, Queen Camilla looked not untouchable, not untouchably regal, but cornered. For a moment, nothing moved. The photograph and pendant had vanished back into Blake's tunic, but their ghost clung to the courtyard air. Every lens stayed locked on him. Every microphone tilted forward, as if waiting for the next revelation. Queen Camilla stood in the centre of it all, shoulders squared, chin held high. But her eyes betrayed the strain, a flicker toward the crowd, a glance at the colonel, then back to the sergeant. The mask of composure was intact, but it was fraying. Captain Morton, still restless, hissed under his breath, "This ends now." He lunged forward, intent on tearing the evidence from Blake's person. The colonel's arm shot out again, steel hard. "Stand down, Captain!" His voice carried louder this time, echoing off the stone walls. The gathered journalists leaned in like wolves scenting blood. Camilla's lips pressed thin. Her authority should have ended the moment Morton moved. Her word should have been absolute. But another officer had intervened, not to protect her dignity, but to keep the sergeant's truth alive. That, more than the pendant or paper, cracked her foundation. Blake did not move. His stillness was heavier than violence. His voice, when it came, was calm as ever. "I have stood watch in silence, ma'am, for years. Today I cannot, because this is not about me. It is about what was written down, hidden and sworn to secrecy, and it will not vanish because a man in rank calls it treason." He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. The crowd heard him. The microphones caught every syllable. Camilla's throat worked once, as if she had swallowed something sharp. Then, almost too quiet to believe, she said, "What do you want, Sergeant?" The words froze the square. A Queen Consort had spoken not in command, not in dismissal, but in concession. The colonel's eyes narrowed. He recognized what the world would see in those 6 words. Not authority, but fracture. A monarch's consort, begging clarification from a guardsman in front of cameras. Blake's head tilted just slightly. The faintest gesture of acknowledgement. Only that the truth not be buried, that the people you stand before know what was signed into record. Camilla's hands clenched around her clutch. And if they misunderstand, if rumour drowns reality, do you understand the fire you've set alight? The crowd picked up her words instantly, muttering, repeating phrases. Fire, misunderstand, record. Each one twisted as it passed from mouth to mouth. The colonel stepped forward, voice sharp but deliberate. "Ma'am, with respect, silence feeds rumour more than clarity ever could." It was subtle, but deadly. He had sided, publicly, unmistakably, with the guard. For the first time, Camilla faltered visibly. Her shoulders dipped. Her chin dropped half an inch. The mask slipped. She looked not like the untouchable consort of a king, but a woman surrounded by questions she could not answer. Phones lifted higher. Journalists shouted over one another. "Is this about your son, ma'am? Were records falsified? Who ordered the files sealed?" The noise rose to a fever pitch until Camilla, her voice trembling against the din, cried out, "Enough!" It carried across the courtyard, brittle and human. Not regal, not commanding, just desperate. Silence swept back, sudden and absolute. Even the tourists stopped muttering, as if stunned by the naked edge in her tone. Blake lowered his head a fraction, a gesture halfway between respect and finality. His duty was done, not to his uniform, not to his captain, but to the truth he had carried. Camilla's eyes locked on his once more, pleading without words. A silent bargain hung in the air. Return to silence. Let the cameras record nothing more, and maybe the monarchy could contain the flames. But the damage was sealed. The world had already seen the crack. The colonel broke the silence with a single phrase, delivered like a sentence. "This cannot be undone, ma'am." The Queen Consort's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, but enough. Enough for the crowd to see what it wanted. Enough for the world to whisper that the truth was real. And in that fragile second, the woman who had commanded palaces and processions looked, for the first time in living memory, cornered by a single soldier in scarlet and black. The square had become a living thing, breathing, pulsing, waiting. Cameras clicked like insects in a swarm, microphones craned closer. And the silence that followed the Queen Consort's crack of desperation was deeper than any drill square pause. Sergeant Blake remained unmoving, rifle tight against his shoulder, bearskin shadowing his face. But the silence around him wasn't passive anymore. It was alive with expectation. Every civilian, every journalist, every officer standing nearby understood that something irreversible had just happened. Then, out of the crowd's hum, boots struck stone, slow, deliberate, unhurried. General Fairfax, a decorated veteran whose presence commanded more than cameras ever could, stepped forward from the line of officials. His chest bore rows of medals that glinted in the fading light, each one earned in battle, each one heavy with history. The man's every step cut through the noise until the crowd stilled again, held in suspense. He stopped between Blake and the Queen Consort, his back straight, his eyes unreadable. The pause stretched until the air itself seemed to tighten. "Sergeant Blake," the general said at last, his voice as calm as carved stone, "you have spoken when silence was expected. Do you understand the gravity of that choice?" Blake's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, sir." The general's gaze shifted to Camilla, whose eyes shone, not with anger, but with something closer to fear, something human. Then back to Blake. "Do you stand by it?" Blake's jaw tightened. "I do, sir. I stand by it because I was there, because truth, once seen, cannot be unsaid." The square held its breath. The general didn't move for several long seconds. Then he did something that sent a ripple through history itself. He drew in one sharp breath, lifted his hand and saluted. Not the Queen Consort, the Royal Guard. Gasps tore through the square like a wave breaking on stone. Tourists clutched their mouths, journalists nearly dropped their cameras, and the officers on duty froze where they stood. A salute was the language of respect, of recognition, of validation. And to see a general, a man who had stood beside kings and commanded armies, offer it to a silent guardsman in defiance of the crown's consort, it was a gesture that would echo beyond the palace gates. Camilla's composure shattered in that instant. Her hand shot outward, not with regal poise, but with a plea. "Please," she whispered, barely audible over the crowd. "Enough. Stop." But the moment had already taken life of its own. The colonel followed the general's lead, saluting as well. Then a sergeant major. Then, one by one, guards across the square, men of scarlet and bearskin, raised their hands in unison. What began as a single salute became a silent wall of loyalty, not to a Queen Consort, but to the principles Sergeant Blake had defended. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, not in chaos, but in something stranger. Silence, broken only by sharp inhales and the stutter of cameras. The kind of silence where people knew they had witnessed something they would tell for the rest of their lives. Blake did not move, his hand never lifting to return the gesture. His duty was to stand, to endure, and he did so without falter. That, more than any response, was enough. Queen Camilla stood alone in the centre, her authority unmoored. For 47 seconds, the balance of power had shifted visibly. And though no proclamation was made, no verdict spoken, the truth was written into every camera frame, every eyewitness memory. General Fairfax lowered his salute with military precision, his voice carrying once more, "This moment will not be forgotten, nor should it." He turned and faced the Queen Consort. "Ma'am, the world has now heard. The time for silence is over." Camilla's lips trembled, her reply strangled in her throat. For the first time in her public life, words failed her. And so the scene ended, not with command, nor dismissal, nor decree, but with her silence and the salute that the world would replay endlessly in the days to come. The guard stood motionless. The crowd stood witness. And history shifted, quietly but irreversibly, in the shadow of the palace walls. What do you think? Should Sergeant Blake have stayed silent, like tradition demanded? Or was he right to speak when he did? And if you'd been standing in that square, what would you have done in that moment? Drop your answers in the comments below. I read every single one. And before you go, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss a story, and share this video with a friend. Our other videos should be on screen right now. Go check them out next. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new story.